They laughed at my secondhand clothes and my beat-up Honda. My own family actually started a whisper campaign about how I'd settled for such a simple life. But when that black helicopter touched down on my sister's perfectly manicured lawn, during Sunday dinner, and my husband William stepped out in his flight suit, the laughter died real quick. What they didn't know about our life was about to change everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Sophie, and I've always been the family disappointment. Not in any dramatic way that makes for good TV movies, but in that quiet, persistent way that eats at Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. While my sister Jessica built her McMansion in the suburbs and my brother Marcus flaunted his luxury car collection, I lived in a modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street with my husband William. The house wasn't much to look at from the outside. Built in 1952, it had that post-war simplicity that some people call charming and others call outdated. The white paint was always a little too bright from our frequent touch-ups, and the small front garden was William's pride and joy, though he kept it deliberately understated. Our neighbors, the Hendersons and the Kellys, had similar homes. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids still rode bikes in the street and everyone knew each other's first names. William worked what the family generously called odd hours. He'd disappear for weeks at a time, sometimes with just a day's notice. When pressed for details at family functions, I'd simply say he worked in transportation. This always earned sympathetic nods from my relatives, who assumed he was probably a long-haul truck driver or maybe worked for the railroad. The truth was, William had asked me early in our marriage to keep his job details private, and I respected that completely. It wasn't out of shame or secrecy in any negative sense, but William had always been a remarkably private person about his professional life. My own job didn't help my family's perception of our situation. I worked part-time at Thompson's hardware store downtown, mainly because I genuinely enjoyed helping people find solutions to their home improvement problems. Old Mr. Thompson had owned the place for 37 years, and there was something comforting about the smell of sawdust and the organized chaos of bins filled with screws, washers, and brackets. The pay wasn't substantial, but it covered our groceries and gave me something meaningful to do. The comments started small. At my cousin Rachel's wedding 2 years ago, my Aunt Dorothy mentioned how practical my dress looked. It was a simple navy blue number I'd found at a consignment shop, and while it wasn't designer, it fit well and looked appropriate. But Dorothy's tone carried that particular brand of pity reserved for family members who've clearly given up on, trying to improve their station in life. Then there was the car situation. William and I shared a 2008 Honda Civic that had seen better days. The paint was starting to fade, and there was a small dent on the passenger side from where I'd misjudged a parking space at the grocery store. It ran perfectly fine, got excellent gas mileage, and had never left us stranded. But next to Marcus's collection of sports cars and Jessica's gleaming SUV, it looked exactly what it was: a sensible, aging vehicle chosen for reliability over status. The whispered conversations became more frequent at family gatherings. I'd walk into a room and catch the tail end of sentences. "Such a shame," she settled. Or, "Could have done so much better." My mother, bless her heart, would change the subject quickly, but the damage was always done. The implication was clear. Sophie had married beneath her potential and was now living a disappointingly modest life. Jessica, my older sister, was particularly vocal about her concerns. She lived in Westbrook Estates, a development where the smallest house was 4,000 square feet, and the homeowners association had rules about everything from mailbox styles to approved holiday decorations. Her husband, Brad, worked in pharmaceutical sales and made what Jessica frequently described as excellent money. Their 3 children attended private school, played travel soccer, and took piano lessons from an instructor who'd studied at Juilliard. "Sophie," Jessica would say during our monthly coffee dates, "I just worry about you two. You're living paycheck To paycheck. William's never around, and you're working retail. Don't you want more security? More comfort? Her concern was genuine, I knew, but it always carried an undertone that suggested our choices were somehow misguided or naive. Marcus, my younger brother, took a different approach. He'd recently started his own consulting firm and had developed what he called an investment mindset. Every conversation with Marcus eventually turned to financial planning, real estate opportunities, or the importance of building wealth for the future. He'd look around our small living room with its secondhand furniture and shake his head slightly, as if personally pained by our lack of ambition. You know, Sophie, if you and William ever want to talk about getting into some entry-level investments, I could help you guys out, he'd offer. Even just a small portfolio to start building something for yourselves. The most difficult part wasn't the comments themselves, but the way they made me question things I'd never questioned before. William and I were happy. We enjoyed quiet evenings together when he was home. We took walks through the neighborhood. We read books and watched old movies and cooked meals together. We traveled sometimes, though always modestly, and usually to places that were more about natural beauty than luxury accommodations. But after particularly intense family gatherings, I'd find myself wondering if we were missing something important. Were we being naive about financial security? Were we failing to plan properly for the future? Should William be looking for a more conventional job with better pay and a regular schedule? These doubts would usually fade after a day or two, especially when William returned from one of his work trips. He had a way of bringing a sense of calm certainty back into our house. We'd sit on our small back deck in the evenings, sharing stories about what had happened while he was away, and everything would feel right again. William never seemed bothered by my family's attitude toward our lifestyle. If anything, he found their assumptions mildly amusing. Let them think what they want to think, he'd say when I'd relay the latest comment from Jessica or Marcus. We know what our life really looks like. The situation came to a head 3 months ago when my parents announced they were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary with a big family dinner. Not just immediate family, but aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends they'd known for decades. My mother wanted to host it at Jessica's house since she had the most space and, as she put it, the most impressive setup for entertaining. Jessica was thrilled to showcase her home and immediately began planning an elaborate menu that would demonstrate both her culinary skills and her access to high-end ingredients. The guest list grew to include about 30 people, and Jessica started referring to it as the event of the year for the family. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, the family group text chain was constantly buzzing with updates and suggestions. Jessica shared photos of her menu planning, Marcus offered to bring wine from his personal collection, and various cousins discussed what they'd be wearing to this suddenly very formal family dinner. I found myself feeling increasingly anxious about the gathering. It wasn't just the size of it, but the clear expectation that this would be a showcase of family success and prosperity. Jessica had mentioned several times that she wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, because some of my parents' friends hadn't seen the whole family together in years. William was scheduled to be away for work during the first week of the Yahtzee month when the dinner was planned, but he assured me he'd be back in time. I wouldn't miss your parents' anniversary, he said. Besides, I'm curious to see how this elaborate dinner of Jessica's turns out. The week before the dinner, the family group texts became increasingly frequent. Jessica shared photos of her house preparations, including professional flower arrangements and rented table settings. Marcus posted pictures of the wine selection he'd assembled. Even our cousins were getting into the spirit, discussing their outfits, and making the dinner sound more like a wedding reception than a simple family celebration. Then, 3 days before the dinner, William's work situation changed. He called me from wherever he was and explained that he might have to extend his trip by a day or two. I'm going to do everything I can to make it back in time, he said. But if the weather doesn't cooperate, I might be cutting it close. This created a minor crisis in my mind. The thought of attending this increasingly elaborate family gathering alone, fielding questions about William's absence and enduring more sympathetic comments about our situation, felt overwhelming. I considered calling my mother and asking if we could postpone, but I knew that wasn't realistic, given how much planning Jessica had already invested. 2 days before the dinner, I still hadn't heard from William about his definitive return time. The family group texts had reached a fever pitch of planning details, and I was starting to feel like I might need to attend alone and make excuses for William's absence. The thought of explaining his unpredictable work schedule to 30 family members and friends felt exhausting. Then, the morning before the dinner, William called with good news. "I'll definitely be there," he said. "Might be cutting it a little. Close timing-wise, but I'll be there." There was something different in his voice, a kind of anticipation I hadn't heard before, but I attributed it to his relief at being able to make it home for my parents' celebration. On the day of the dinner, I spent the morning choosing what to wear and trying to manage my anxiety about the evening ahead. I settled on a simple black dress I'd had for several years, paired with the pearl earrings William had given me for our 5th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I realized I looked exactly like what my family expected: simple, understated, and probably underdressed for whatever Jessica had planned. William still wasn't home by early afternoon, but he'd texted to confirm he'd meet me directly at Jessica's house. This was unusual, since he typically liked to come home and change clothes before social events, but I assumed his travel schedule was just particularly tight this time. I arrived at Jessica's house at 5 o'clock, an hour before the official start time, because she'd asked family members to come early to help with final preparations. The scene that greeted me was more elaborate than I'd expected, even knowing Jessica's tendencies toward over-planning. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The house was decorated like something from a home design magazine, with professional quality flower arrangements and elegant table settings that clearly hadn't come from any regular store. Jessica had hired a catering assistant to help serve, and the dining room table was extended to its maximum length with additional rented tables set up in the living room. "Sophie," Jessica called out when she saw me. "You look nice." Very understated. The pause before nice said everything about her assessment of my outfit choice. As other family members began arriving, I quickly realized that everyone else had interpreted this dinner as a much more formal affair than I'd understood. The men were wearing suits, the women were in cocktail attire, and several people had clearly made special shopping trips for the occasion. My cousin Rachel arrived with her husband in what appeared to be a new luxury sedan, and she immediately began gushing about Jessica's absolutely stunning home decorations. My Uncle Frank, who I hadn't seen in over a year, was wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month at the hardware store. "Where's William?" my mother asked, giving me a hug. "I'm so glad he could make it back from his trip." "He's coming directly from work," I explained. "He should be here soon." This led to the inevitable questions about what exactly William was doing for work that required so much travel, and I gave my usual vague responses about transportation and logistics. I could see the familiar look of sympathetic concern cross several faces, the look that said, "Poor Sophie, still making excuses for her husband's unstable employment." As more guests arrived and the evening progressed, I found myself feeling increasingly out of place. The conversations centered around home renovations, vacation destinations, and business successes. My contribution about enjoying my part-time job at the hardware store was met with polite smiles and quick subject changes. By 7 o'clock, William still hadn't arrived, and I was starting to worry that his travel plans had fallen through. Jessica kept asking about him, and I could tell she was getting annoyed that her carefully planned seating arrangement was being disrupted by his absence. "Maybe we should just start without him," Marcus suggested. "You know how unreliable these blue-collar jobs can be with timing." The comment stung. partly because of its dismissive tone, and partly because I was genuinely worried about William at this point. I was about to call him when my phone buzzed with a text. 5 minutes away. Hope you're ready for this. The message was oddly cryptic, but I was just relieved he was finally going to make it. I announced to the room that William would be arriving shortly, and Jessica began directing people toward their seats for dinner. The sound came first, a deep, rhythmic thumping that seemed to vibrate through Jessica's perfectly designed living room. Conversations paused mid-sentence as heads turned toward the windows, trying to identify the source of the increasingly loud noise. "Is that construction equipment?" asked my Uncle Frank, peering through the sheer curtains. "On a Sunday evening?" The zapper. Sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't construction equipment. It was the unmistakable whoosh 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 of helicopter rotors, and it was getting closer. "Maybe it's a medical helicopter," suggested my cousin Rachel, though she sounded uncertain. "There could be an emergency somewhere in the neighborhood." Jessica looked annoyed. Her carefully orchestrated dinner was being disrupted by whatever was happening outside. "Can't they fly those things somewhere else?" she muttered, adjusting the centerpiece that had been jostled when several guests stood up to look out the windows. The noise became overwhelming. It wasn't passing overhead, it was descending. The windows rattled slightly, and the flower petals on Jessica's expensive arrangements began to flutter from the downdraft. "It's landing," my Uncle Frank announced, his voice filled with disbelief. "There's a helicopter landing in Jessica's backyard." This statement caused an immediate exodus from the dining room. 30 people crowded toward the large sliding glass doors that led to Jessica's expansive backyard, pressing against the windows and each other to get a better view. The helicopter was sleek and black, military in appearance, but clearly civilian. As it touched down on Jessica's meticulously maintained lawn, the rotor wash sent leaves swirling and bent the carefully planted ornamental grasses flat against the ground. The aircraft settled with surprising grace onto the grass, its engines winding down to a lower hum. "Whose helicopter is that?" my mother asked, her voice barely audible over the diminishing noise. Jessica was staring at her lawn with obvious distress. The helicopter's landing had left distinct impressions in her perfect grass, and she was already calculating the cost of landscaping repairs. "This is private property," she said. "They can't just land here without permission." Through the aircraft's tinted windows, we could see the silhouette of a pilot in the cockpit. The passenger door opened, and a figure in a flight suit stepped out, ducking slightly under the still rotating rotors. It was William. He looked completely different from the William my family knew. Gone were the casual clothes and relaxed demeanor they associated with him. This William moved with crisp precision, checking something on his wrist before looking toward the house. His flight suit was clearly high quality, fitted perfectly, and bore patches and insignia that were too small to read from the distance, but looked distinctly official. The backyard fell completely silent except for the helicopter's engines. William walked across Jessica's lawn with confident strides, seemingly unbothered by the 30 faces staring at him through the glass doors. As he got closer, more details became visible. The flight suit was immaculate, his boots were polished to a mirror shine, and the patches on his uniform included what appeared to be military insignia and aviation wings. "Is that William?" my cousin Rachel whispered. He reached the patio and smiled at the crowd gathered at the windows. This was the same warm smile I saw every day, but somehow it looked different framed by the flight suit and the helicopter backdrop. He knocked on the glass door, a casual gesture that seemed almost surreal given the circumstances. Jessica, still in shock, slid the door open. "Sorry I'm late," William said, stepping into the house. "Traffic was lighter than expected, but I had to file an extended flight plan at the last minute." He looked around at the stunned faces and seemed to realize that some explanation might be in order. "William," my father finally managed to say, That's your helicopter?" "One of them," William replied matter-of-factly. "The citation," Was having some maintenance issues, so I took the backup aircraft instead. He paused, seeming to notice everyone's expressions for the first time. I should probably change out of my flight gear before dinner. The room remained frozen. William looked at me with a slight smile that suggested he was enjoying this moment, more than he was letting on. Sophie, could you show me where I can change clothes? I brought a suit in my flight bag. This simple request seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. People began talking all at once, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions and exclamations. William, you're a pilot? Is that a military helicopter? How do you afford aircraft maintenance? What exactly do you do for work? William held up a hand, and the room fell quiet again. There was something about his presence that commanded attention in a way I'd never seen before. At home, he was gentle and unassuming. Here, surrounded by my shocked family, he radiated a quiet authority that was unmistakable. I suppose this calls for some explanation, he said. Sophie, that suit? I nodded and led him toward Jessica's guest room, my mind spinning. The hallway felt longer than usual, and I could hear the explosion of conversation resuming behind us. As soon as we left the room. William, I said once we were alone, what is happening? Whose helicopter is that really? He was already unzipping his flight suit, revealing a crisp white dress shirt underneath. It's mine, Sophie. I told you I work in transportation. He smiled at my expression. I just didn't mention that I transport myself mostly. But how? I mean, helicopters cost... I trailed off, realizing I had no idea what helicopters cost, but certainly more than we could afford on our modest household income. William pulled a garment bag from his flight case and began laying out what was clearly a very expensive suit. Sophie, we need to talk. I know this is confusing, and I should have explained things better before now. He paused in his unpacking. The truth is, money has never been an issue for us. It's never been an issue for me. I sat down on Jessica's perfectly made guest bed, trying to process this information. What do you mean? I mean that the house on Maple Street, your job at the hardware store, our simple lifestyle, those are choices we made, not limitations we live with. William was changing clothes as he spoke, transforming from the mysterious pilot back into the husband I knew, except now the suit he was putting on clearly cost more than my car. I don't understand. William sat down next to me on the bed, now dressed in what was obviously a designer suit that fit him perfectly. My full-time job is managing investments, my family's investments primarily, but I've expanded the portfolio significantly over the years. He took my hand. Sophie, we're wealthy. Very wealthy. We always have been. The information felt surreal. But why didn't you tell me? Why do we live like... Like what? Like we're happy? William smiled. Sophie, everything about our life together has been genuine. I wanted us to build something real, something that wasn't influenced by money or expectations or what other people thought we should be doing. He gestured toward the door, where we could still hear the muffled sounds of animated conversation. I wanted to know that you loved me for who I am, not what I could provide. But I work at a hardware store. Because you enjoy it. Because you like helping people, and you like old Mr. Thompson, and you like the rhythm of that work. William stood up and adjusted his tie. If you wanted to stop working tomorrow, you could. If you wanted to open your own business or go back to school or travel the world, we could do any of those things. I looked at him standing there in his expensive suit, and he was still William, still my husband, but suddenly everything felt different. How wealthy are we talking about? Wealthy enough that your family's concerns about our financial security are... He paused, searching for the right word. Unnecessary. From the living room, we could hear Jessica's voice rising above the others. I still don't understand how they can afford aircraft ownership on retail and transportation wages. William chuckled. Should we go back and clear up some of the confusion? I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever was about to happen in that room, but I nodded. William offered me his arm, and we walked back toward the dining room together. The conversation stopped immediately when we appeared. William looked completely different in his suit, not just well-dressed, but carrying himself with a confidence and presence that transformed him entirely. Several people actually stared openly, as if trying to reconcile this version of William with the man they thought they knew. "Please, everyone sit down," William said. "I owe you all an explanation, and Sophie's parents deserve to enjoy their anniversary dinner." People slowly returned to their seats, but the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Instead of the earlier casual family chatter, there was an electric tension of curiosity and anticipation. William remained standing, clearly comfortable, being the center of attention in a way that surprised me. "First, I want to apologize for the dramatic entrance. I try to keep my work and personal life separate, but my flight schedule today didn't give me time to arrange alternative transportation." "William?" my father interjected. "What exactly do you do?" "I manage investments for my family's financial group. We have holdings in various industries: technology, real estate, energy, aviation." William spoke casually, as if discussing the weather. "The travel is necessary because our portfolio requires regular oversight of properties and operations across the country." My brother Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of scale are we talking about?" William glanced at me, and I could see he was trying to decide how much detail to share. "Substantial enough that Sophie and I have never needed to worry about financial security. We live modestly because we choose to, not because we have to." The silence that followed this statement was profound. I could see people recalculating everything they thought they knew about our life, our choices, our apparent struggles. Jessica was the first to speak. "But Sophie works retail." "Because I enjoy it," I said, finding my voice. "Because it makes me happy." "And your house is in a neighborhood we love, with people we care about," William added. "Size and price don't always correlate with satisfaction." My Aunt Dorothy, who had made countless comments about my practical choices over the years, looked genuinely confused. "But why didn't you ever say anything?" "We all thought—" "We know what you thought," William said gently. "And we understood why you thought it. But we were happy with our privacy." The room buzzed with whispered conversations as people began processing this information. I could see family members exchanging glances, probably remembering various comments they'd made about our lifestyle over the years. My mother, ever the peacemaker, clapped her hands together. "Well," she said brightly, "this certainly makes for an interesting anniversary dinner. Should we eat before the food gets cold?" But food was clearly the last thing on anyone's mind. The questions came in rapid succession. "How long have you been wealthy? What kind of investments? Do you own other aircraft? Why keep it secret?" William answered each question patiently, explaining that his family had built wealth over several generations, that he'd inherited significant assets and grown them substantially, that yes, we owned several aircraft and properties, and that we'd kept it private because we valued normalcy and genuine relationships over status displays. As the evening progressed, I watched my family members' attitudes shift in real time. The sympathetic looks disappeared, replaced by a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and what appeared to be newfound respect. Conversations that had previously focused on offering us financial advice or expressing concern about our future suddenly pivoted to asking for investment tips and business insights. The most striking change was in how people interacted with me. Throughout my adult life, I'd been the family member who'd settled, who needed guidance and support. Now, suddenly, I was being asked about our travel experiences, our lifestyle choices, and our future plans, but with an entirely different tone. One that suggested my choices might actually be enviable rather than pitiable. Jessica spent much of the dinner apologizing for her damaged lawn and insisting that helicopter landings were welcome any time. Marcus launched into detailed questions about portfolio management and investment strategies. Even my Aunt Dorothy complimented my dress, noting how elegantly understated it looked. The transformation was both fascinating and slightly uncomfortable. These were the same people who had expressed genuine concern about our financial situation just hours earlier, but now they were treating us like we'd somehow become different people simply because they had new information about our bank account. William handled it all with grace, answering questions honestly while steering the conversation back to my parents and their anniversary whenever possible. But I could see him making mental notes about the dramatic shift in everyone's behavior, and I suspected we'd have a lot to discuss on the flight home. The drive home that night was surreal. William had arranged for the helicopter to be moved to a private hangar, and we took my Honda Civic back to our house on Maple Street. The contrast between the evening's revelations and our quiet ride through familiar neighborhoods felt almost dreamlike. "Well," William said as we pulled into our driveway, "that went better than I expected." I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness for a moment. Our modest house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but somehow everything felt different. "William, I need to understand something. When you say we're wealthy, what does that actually mean for us? For our daily life?" He was quiet for a long moment. "It means that every choice we've made about how to live has been exactly that. A choice. The house, your job, our lifestyle, even this car. None of it was because we couldn't afford something different." Inside the house, William made tea while I sat at our small kitchen table, trying to process the evening. The same table where we'd eaten countless simple dinners, where I'd worried about grocery budgets and car repairs, where William had reassured me that we were doing fine financially. "I feel like I don't know you," I said when he handed me the mug. "Sophie, you know me better than anyone in the world." William sat across from me in the same chair he'd occupied for 5 years of marriage. "The only thing that's changed is that you now know something I've always known, that we have more options than we've been using. But why? Why choose to live like this if we don't have to?" William smiled, the same gentle expression I'd fallen in love with. "Because this makes me happy. Coming home to you in this house, working in the garden, having dinner at this table, walking through the neighborhood with you on Sunday mornings. Why would I want to change any of that just because I could afford to?" Over the next few days, the family phone calls started. First, my mother called to check in and ask if we might want to join them for dinner at the country club next weekend. Then Jessica, suggesting we should get together for lunch at a restaurant she'd never mentioned before but described as absolutely divine. Marcus called to discuss investment opportunities, specifically wondering if William might be interested in backing his consulting firm's expansion plans. My cousin Rachel sent a text asking for advice about financial planners, and my Aunt Dorothy left a voicemail wondering if we might have recommendations for vacation destinations, since we, obviously, travel in style. The sudden attention was overwhelming and, frankly, uncomfortable. These were people who had known me my entire life, but now every interaction felt filtered through this new information about our financial situation. The most challenging call came from Jessica 3 days after the dinner. She wanted to apologize for years of misunderstanding our situation and suggested that maybe we'd all been too quick to judge our lifestyle choices. But her apology came wrapped in questions about our real estate portfolio and suggestions for ways we could really live up to our potential now that the truth was out. "Sophie," she said during our phone conversation, "you could quit that little job at the hardware store and do something more substantial. Maybe start a foundation or get involved in some meaningful charity work. Something that matches your actual status." The phrase "little job" stung. 3 days earlier, Jessica had expressed sympathy for my having to work retail at all. Now, apparently, the job itself was diminished not because of the work, but because I was choosing it despite having other options. I like my job, Jessica, but surely you want something more significant, something that uses your education and your resources to make a real impact. After hanging up, I realized that Jessica's new attitude was somehow more insulting than her previous pity had been. At least when she felt sorry for me, she wasn't dismissing the things that actually mattered to me. William found me that evening, sitting on our back deck, staring at the small garden he'd cultivated over the years. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into the chair next to mine. "Complicated." I told him about Jessica's call and the strange shift in how everyone was treating me. It's like they think the person I was before Sunday night wasn't real, or wasn't worth respecting. Unfortunately, that's probably exactly what they think. William reached over and took my hand. For some people, financial status determines not just how they treat you, but how they value your choices and opinions. "Is that why you kept it secret?" "Partly." William was quiet for a moment. "My family comes from old money, Sophie. I grew up watching how people changed when they found out about our wealth. Suddenly, everyone had opinions about how we should spend our time, what causes we should support, what responsibilities we had to the community." He squeezed my hand. "I wanted us to build a life based on what we actually wanted, not what people thought we should want." That weekend, we were invited to 3 different social events by family members who had never shown much interest in our social calendar before. Jessica wanted us to attend a charity gala where tickets cost more than I made in a month. Marcus suggested we join him for golf at his country club, despite neither William nor I having expressed any interest in golf. Even my parents invited us to join their book club, which they'd never mentioned before, and which apparently met at members' homes in the most expensive part of town. "We don't have to go to any of these things," William reminded me as we looked at the various invitations. "We never did before." But I found myself curious about these new opportunities, not because I was suddenly interested in charity galas or country clubs, but because I wanted to understand this world that I apparently had access to but had never known existed. We decided to attend Jessica's charity gala, partly out of family obligation and partly out of curiosity. William arranged for a car service, explaining that driving ourselves would require dealing with valet parking and might create complications if we wanted to leave early. The event was held at the Grand Marquis Hotel downtown, in a ballroom I'd only seen in magazines. Jessica met us at the entrance, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my annual salary, and immediately began introducing us to people as my sister Sophie and her husband William, who's in investment management. The evening was educational, in ways I hadn't expected. The conversation was sophisticated and the cause was genuinely important, funding educational programs for underprivileged children. But there was also an underlying current of performance, as if everyone was constantly aware of being evaluated by everyone else. William navigated these interactions with ease, discussing market trends and philanthropic strategies as if he'd been attending such events his entire life, which I realized he probably had. This was his world originally, and he'd stepped away from it by choice, not circumstance. "Your husband is quite impressive," one woman told me during cocktail hour. "His insights on sustainable investing are fascinating. You must be so proud." I found myself nodding and smiling, but feeling oddly detached from the conversation. This woman was talking about William as if she'd discovered something remarkable about him, but to me, he was just William, the man who grew tomatoes in our backyard and made me coffee every morning. The most surreal moment came when we were seated for dinner at a table with several couples I'd never met. The conversation turned to vacation homes and travel experiences, and I listened as people discussed their houses in the Hamptons, their skiing trips to Switzerland, and their private island getaways. "What about you two?" asked the man sitting across from us. "Where do you like to escape to?" William and I exchanged glances, Our most recent vacation had been a long weekend at a state park 3 hours north, where we'd hiked and read books and cooked simple meals over a camp stove. "We prefer quieter destinations," William said diplomatically, "places where we can disconnect and enjoy each other's company." This response seemed to intrigue rather than satisfy our table mates, and I suspected they were interpreting quieter destinations as code for exclusive private resorts rather than public campgrounds. As the evening progressed, I began to understand something important about this world. Wealth wasn't just about having money. It was about being part of a social ecosystem where money created access, expectations, and obligations. People weren't just rich, they were rich in specific ways that connected them to other rich people, in complex networks of social and business relationships. William had stepped away from all of this when he chose our simple life together, but he could step back into it seamlessly because he understood the language, the customs, and the expectations. For me, it felt like visiting a foreign country where I spoke the language but didn't understand the culture. During the car ride home, I asked William about his family's background and why he'd never mentioned the social aspects of wealth before. "My parents died when I was in college," he said. "They were good people, but they lived their entire lives in that world. Charity boards, social obligations, managing family foundations, maintaining relationships with other wealthy families." He looked out the window at the city passing by. "After they died, I inherited not just money, but expectations. Everyone assumed I'd take over their social responsibilities, join the same organizations, maintain the same relationships. But you didn't. I tried for a few years. I attended the events, served on the boards, made the donations everyone expected me to make." William smiled. "But I realized I was living someone else's life. When I met you, I saw a chance to start over and build something that was genuinely mine." "Ours," I corrected. "Ours." The following week brought more invitations and more phone calls. Jessica called twice to report on conversations she'd had with people at the gala who had been so impressed with us. Marcus wanted to schedule lunch to discuss business opportunities. My mother suggested we might want to consider joining the Historical Society, since they were looking for young, dynamic members with resources to contribute. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Mr. Thompson called me at home on Thursday evening, something he'd never done before. "Sophie," he said, his voice careful and formal, "I've been hearing some interesting things about your family's situation." My heart sank. The news of our wealth had apparently spread beyond our immediate family, which meant it would soon be common knowledge throughout our small community. "I want you to know," Mr. Thompson continued, "that your job at the store is secure for as long as you want it. I wouldn't want you to feel pressured to leave just because your circumstances have changed." His kindness was genuine, but I could hear something else in his voice. Uncertainty about whether I would still want to work for him now that I didn't need to. The idea that my motivations for working might be questioned by someone I respected was troubling. "Mr. Thompson, I love working at the store. Nothing about that has changed. I'm glad to hear it. You're the best employee I've ever had, and I'd hate to lose you to other opportunities." After we hung up, I realized that our secret was probably no longer secret at all. In a community our size, news traveled fast, and the story of the helicopter landing at Jessica's house was probably already local legend. The next day at work confirmed my suspicions. Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, came in ostensibly to buy garden stakes but really to ask casually about all the excitement at Jessica's house Sunday night. Mr. Kelly stopped by to pick up some screws he probably didn't need and mentioned that he'd heard interesting things about our family. Even customers I'd helped for years seemed to look at me differently. Some were more deferential, asking for my opinion on purchases they'd previously decided on their own. Others seemed almost suspicious, as if wondering whether I was pretending to care about their home improvement projects. The attention was exhausting, and by Friday afternoon, I was questioning everything about our decision to let the truth come out. William found me that evening sitting in our small living room, surrounded by unopened invitations and unanswered phone messages. "Sophie, talk to me. I don't know how to be rich," I said. "I don't know how to be the person everyone expects me to be now that they know about the money." William sat down next to me on our second-hand couch. "You don't have to be anyone different. The money doesn't change who you are. But it changes how everyone sees me, how they treat me, how they value my choices." I gestured at the pile of invitations. "A week ago, I was Sophie who worked at the hardware store. Now I'm Sophie who chooses to work at the hardware store, and apparently that's either admirably humble or foolishly wasteful, depending on who's judging. And which do you think it is?" I considered his question seriously. "I think it's just who I am, but I'm starting to realize that might not be enough anymore." The breaking point came 2 weeks later, during what started as an ordinary Tuesday morning at Thompson's hardware store. I was helping Mrs. Patterson find the right screws for her kitchen cabinet repair when a woman I'd never seen before walked into the store wearing what was clearly a very expensive suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She waited patiently while I finished with Mrs. Patterson, then approached the counter with the kind of confident smile that suggested she was accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Sophie Mitchell?" she asked, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Diana Blackwell from the Riverside Community Foundation. I was hoping we could have a brief conversation." I shook her hand, confused. "About hardware supplies?" Diana laughed, a polished sound that seemed rehearsed. "About an opportunity that I think would be perfect for someone with your background and resources. Could we perhaps step outside for a moment?" Mr. Thompson was in the back office doing inventory, and the store was quiet, so I agreed. Diana led me to a bench outside the shop, opened her portfolio, and pulled out a thick packet of professionally printed materials. "I'll get straight to the point," she said. "The foundation is launching a new initiative focused on community development and educational support. We're looking for board members who bring both financial resources and genuine community connection." She handed me a glossy brochure. "Your name came up as someone who might be interested in making a meaningful impact." I stared at the brochure, which featured photos of smiling children and well-dressed adults at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. "How did you find me here?" "The foundation does its research," Diana said smoothly. "We know about your family's philanthropic capacity, and we've heard wonderful things about your character and community involvement." She leaned forward slightly. "Sophie, people like you, people with both resources and authentic community ties, are exactly what organizations like ours need to create real change." The conversation continued for 20 minutes. Diana outlined the foundation's goals, the time commitment expected from board members, and the suggested annual contribution that made my eyes widen. She spoke about galas and fundraising events, strategic planning sessions, and community outreach programs. Everything she described sounded worthwhile and important. The foundation was clearly doing good work, and the opportunity to contribute to educational programs and community development was genuinely appealing. But there was something about the way Diana presented it that felt calculated, as if my participation was less about my potential contributions and more about my potential donations. "Think about it," Diana said as she stood to leave. "You have a chance to use your advantages to help people who haven't had the same opportunities. Not everyone gets to make that kind of difference." After she left, I sat on the bench outside the hardware store for several minutes, trying to sort through my feelings. The guilt was immediate and sharp. Here was someone offering me a way to use our wealth for genuine good, and my first instinct was to be suspicious of her motives. When I returned to the store, Mr. Thompson emerged from the back office. "Everything all right?" he asked. "You look troubled." I found myself telling him about Diana's visit, about the foundation opportunity, and about my growing confusion over how to navigate this new reality. Mr. Thompson listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. "Sophie," he said when I finished. Can I tell you something about wealth and obligation? I nodded. My father owned this store before me, and his father before him. 3 generations of Thompsons helping people fix things. He gestured around the shop. We were never wealthy, but we were always comfortable. And you know what I learned? The most important thing isn't how much money you have, or even how you spend it. It's making sure you stay true to who you are, regardless of what other people think you should be doing. But what if I should be doing more? What if I have an obligation to use our resources for bigger things? Mr. Thompson smiled. Sophie, you've worked here for 2 years. In that time, you've helped hundreds of people solve problems, save money, and feel confident about taking care of their homes. You've been patient with elderly customers who take twice as long to explain what they need. You've stayed late to help young parents figure out childproofing solutions. He paused. Tell me how that's less valuable than sitting in board meetings talking about helping people. His words stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening, William found me in our garden, absently watering plants that were already thoroughly soaked. Diana Blackwell visited you today, he said. It wasn't a question. I looked up, startled. How did you know? Because Diana Blackwell visited me 3 days ago, at the office. William sat down on the small bench he'd built next to the tomato plants. She had the same portfolio, the same pitch, and the same research about our philanthropic capacity. What? Did you tell her? I told her we'd discuss it and get back to her. William smiled. I also told her that any charitable giving decisions we made would be private and wouldn't include public recognition or board positions. She made it sound like we had an obligation. That's her job. Diana Blackwell makes her living convincing wealthy people that they need to demonstrate their social responsibility through visible, organized philanthropy. William pulled a weed from between the tomato plants. She's probably very good at what she does. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the evening light fade over our small backyard. The garden was William's pride and joy, not because it was elaborate or expensive, but because he'd built it with his own hands and tended it with genuine care. William, do you think we're being selfish? I asked finally. Living quietly while we could be doing more to help people? Do you think we're not helping people? I considered the question. In addition to my work at the hardware store, we volunteered at the food bank twice a month, helped elderly neighbors with yard work, and contributed quietly to several local charities. But compared to what we could do with our financial resources, it felt small. I think we could be helping more people. You're probably right. William stood up and began gathering the gardening tools. The question is whether helping more people requires us to change who we are and how we live. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Diana's visit, about the foundation's work, and about the guilt I felt for not immediately jumping at the opportunity to make a meaningful impact. By 2 a.m, I was sitting at our kitchen table with my laptop, researching the Riverside Community Foundation. What I found was complicated. The foundation did important work. Their educational programs had measurable positive impacts. Their community development projects had helped revitalize several struggling neighborhoods, and their fundraising was efficient and transparent. But I also found photos from their events, lists of board members, and articles about their galas that painted a picture of wealth as performance, charity as social currency. The next morning, I called Jessica. Sophie, she answered on the first ring. I'm so glad you called. Brad and I were just talking about how you and William should really consider getting more involved in the community now that people know about your situation. Jessica, what do you mean by more involved? Well, important things. Charity boards, fundraising committees, maybe starting your own foundation. Jessica's enthusiasm was palpable. You could make such a difference, and it would be good for you socially, too. The right kind of involvement opens doors to the right kind of people. The right kind of people? Oh, you know what I mean. People who matter. People who can introduce you to opportunities and include you in the kinds of circles where real decisions get made. Jessica paused. Sophie, you have a chance to be somebody. Important now, don't waste it on small-town anonymity. After hanging up, I realized that Jessica's version of using our wealth responsibly looked remarkably similar to Diana Blackwell's, and both seemed to involve becoming someone different than who I was. That afternoon, Marcus called with his own suggestion. He'd been invited to a networking event for young professionals in finance and thought William and I should attend with him. It's exactly the kind of thing you guys should be doing now, he said. Building relationships with other people in your wealth bracket. You can't just keep living like regular people when you're clearly not a regular person. Marcus, what makes you think we're not regular people? Come on, Sophie. Regular people don't own multiple aircraft. Regular people don't have investment portfolios that generate enough income to live comfortably without working. Marcus sounded slightly impatient. You guys have been playing house in that little neighborhood, but it's time to start living at your actual level. The phrase playing house stung. It implied that our life together, our home, our daily routines, and our choices were somehow pretend, a game we'd been playing instead of living authentically. That evening, I shared the day's conversations with William while we prepared dinner together in our small kitchen. Everyone seems to think we owe it to ourselves and to society to live differently now, I said, chopping vegetables for a simple pasta dish. Like we've been wasting our potential. William was quiet for a long moment, focusing on the sauce he was stirring. Sophie, can I show you something tomorrow? Something I've never shown you before? I looked up from the cutting board. What kind of something? My parents' house. The house I grew up in. William met my eyes. I think it might help you understand why I made the choices I made. The next morning, William drove us 40 minutes outside the city to an area I'd never visited before. The roads became wider and more private, lined with stone walls and elaborate gates. We turned into a driveway marked only by a discreet brass nameplate reading Hartwell Estate. The driveway curved through professionally maintained grounds for nearly a quarter mile, before revealing a house that was less house than mansion. 3 stories of Georgian brick, with columns, terraces, and more windows than I could count at a glance. Even knowing about William's wealth, the scale of the property was overwhelming. This is where you grew up? I asked as we pulled up to the front entrance, until I left for college. William turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a library, a ballroom, staff quarters, and a 4-car garage, plus the guest house, the pool house, and the grounds. Keeper's cottage. We sat in the car looking at the imposing facade. Despite its obvious grandeur, the house felt somehow cold and impersonal, more like a museum than a home. It's beautiful, I said, because it was. It's empty, William replied. It has been since my parents died. I pay a maintenance service to keep it in good condition, but no one lives here anymore. Why don't you sell it? William finally opened his car door. Come inside. I want you to see something. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings that looked like they belonged in museums, and furniture that was clearly antique and expensive. But everything was covered in dust sheets, and our footsteps echoed in the empty rooms. William led me through the grand foyer, past a dining room that could seat 20 people, and into what had obviously been a formal living room. The furniture here wasn't covered, and the room looked as if it had been frozen in time. This is where my parents entertained, William said. Charity board meetings, fundraising planning sessions, political strategy discussions. He gestured toward a wall covered with framed photographs. Every important person in the state came through this room at some point. I walked over to examine the photographs. They showed William's parents at various formal events, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by other wealthy-looking people, always smiling the same polished smiles I'd seen at Jessica's charity. Gala. They look happy, I said. They looked appropriate, William corrected. There's a difference. We continued through the house. William showed me his childhood bedroom, which was larger than our entire living room, and his father's study, which contained more books than some libraries. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and somehow lifeless. The most telling room was what William called the calendar room, a small office where his mother had managed their social obligations. The walls were covered with schedules, invitation, lists, and organizational charts for various charitable commitments. Even years after her death, the room felt busy and stressful. My mother spent 40 hours a week managing their social responsibilities, William explained. Board meetings, charity events, fundraising committees, political functions. She had an assistant whose full-time job was just keeping track of their obligations. It sounds exhausting. It was, and it never ended. Every charity they supported expected increased involvement. Every social connection came with reciprocal obligations. Every public contribution created expectations for future generosity. William picked up a leather-bound planner from his mother's desk. Look at this. The planner was filled with tiny, careful handwriting documenting meetings, events, and commitments. Every day was scheduled from morning until evening, with color-coded entries for different types of obligations. This was just 1 month, William said. April, 3 years before she died. 14 formal events, 6 board meetings, countless planning sessions and social lunches. She was on 7 different charity boards and chaired 2 of them. I flipped through several pages, seeing the same dense scheduling on every spread. When did she relax? She didn't. This was her life. This was what being wealthy and socially responsible looked like for her. William closed the planner gently. She was a good person, Sophie. She genuinely cared about the causes she supported. But somewhere along the way, the obligations became more important than the joy, and the appearances became more important than the impact. We walked back through the empty house to the front entrance, standing in the marble foyer, surrounded by the echoes of wealth and social prominence. I began to understand William's choices in a completely new way. You could live here, I said. You could have all of this. I could, and maybe I should. William looked around the grand space. Certainly, a lot of people think I should. But Sophie, when I imagine our life here, when I imagine us hosting charity events and managing social calendars and being photographed at galas, I can't picture you being happy. And I know I wouldn't be. But think of all the good we could do with these resources. We can do good with these resources from anywhere, Sophie. The question is whether we want to do good or whether we want to be seen doing good. William took my hand. Because those are 2 very different things. 3 days after visiting the Hartwell estate, I made my decision. But it didn't come from any grand revelation or dramatic moment. It came from something much simpler. I was at Thompson's hardware store, helping an elderly man named Mr. Chen find parts to repair his bathroom faucet. He'd been struggling with a leak for weeks, but couldn't afford a plumber. As we worked through the problem together, testing different washers and explaining how to install them properly, I watched his face light up with understanding. You just saved me $300, he said, shaking my hand gratefully. And you made it so I can fix it myself. That's worth more than money. Standing there in the familiar aisles of the hardware store, surrounded by practical solutions to everyday problems, I realized something important. The work I was doing mattered. Not because it was grand or visible or socially impressive, but because it was real and immediate and helpful. That evening, I called Diana Blackwell. Sophie, she answered enthusiastically. I was hoping to hear from you. Have you had a chance to consider our conversation? I have, I said. And I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm going to decline. There was a pause. May I ask why? The Foundation's work is so important, and your participation could make such a significant impact. I'm sure it could. But I'm realizing that I already have work that makes an impact, and I don't want to give that up. Diana's tone shifted slightly. Sophie, with respect, retail work is fine as a hobby, but someone with your resources has an obligation to think bigger. You could be helping thousands of people instead of just customers. Ms. Blackwell, those customers are people too, and helping them doesn't become less valuable just because I could theoretically help more people in a different way. I took a breath. I think we have different ideas about what constitutes meaningful work. After hanging up, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. William found me in the garden that evening, carefully staking tomato plants that were growing faster than expected. You called Diana Blackwell, he said, settling onto the bench beside me. How did you know? Because she called me 20 minutes later, asking if there was anything she could do to change our minds. William smiled. I told her we were quite certain. Are you disappointed? William looked genuinely surprised. Sophie, why would I be disappointed that you chose to keep doing work you love instead of taking on obligations that would make you miserable? The next challenge came from my family. When word got out that we'd declined the foundation opportunity, the phone calls started again. Jessica was particularly vocal about what she saw as our wasted potential. Sophie, people like us have responsibilities, she said during what started as a casual check-in call but quickly became a lecture. When you have advantages, you're supposed to use them for something important. I am using them for something important, I replied. I'm using them to live the life I want to live. But you could be on charity boards, hosting fundraisers, making a real difference in the community. Jessica, what makes you think the difference I'm making now isn't real? She was quiet for a moment. It's just small, Sophie. Individual customers, one person at a time. When you could be thinking bigger. Maybe I don't want to think bigger. Maybe I like the small scale. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Jessica clearly frustrated by what she saw as my stubborn refusal to embrace my potential. Marcus had a different approach. He invited William and me to lunch at an expensive restaurant downtown, ostensibly to celebrate our coming out as wealthy people, but really to present us with a business proposition. I've been thinking about our family's situation, he said over appetizers that cost more than most people's lunch budgets. We're in a unique position now. We have resources, we have connections, and we have credibility. We should be leveraging that. Leveraging it how? William asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected where this was heading. Family investment fund. We pool some resources, make strategic investments, maybe get into some development projects. Marcus pulled out his phone and started showing us photos of properties. I've identified several opportunities that would be perfect for our first ventures. The properties were all in low-income neighborhoods, and Marcus's plan involved buying them cheaply, renovating them minimally, and selling them for significant profits. It's win-win, he explained. We make money, and we improve neighborhoods that need investment. What happens to the people who currently live in those neighborhoods? I asked. Marcus looked confused by the question. What do you mean? I mean, when you renovate and flip properties in low-income areas, you typically drive up housing costs and force out long-time residents. How is that helping the community? Sophie, that's just how development works. You can't make improvements without some displacement. Marcus seemed genuinely puzzled by my concern. Besides, we'd be creating value and improving the area. For whom? The lunch ended with Marcus frustrated by our lack of interest in his opportunity and us more convinced than ever that wealth came with a lot of pressure to use it in ways that felt wrong. But the most difficult conversation came from my mother. She visited us at home the following weekend, something she rarely did because she usually preferred to meet at restaurants or at Jessica's house. Sophie, honey, I need to talk to you about something, she said as we sat in our small living room. I'm worried about you. Worried how? I'm worried that you're hiding from your potential because you're afraid of change. Mom looked around. Our modest house with an expression I couldn't quite read. This was a lovely starter home, but now that we know your real situation, don't you think it's time to grow into something more appropriate? Mom, this isn't a starter home. This is our home. But surely you want something bigger, something that reflects your actual status? I realized that my mother, like everyone else, was struggling to understand how someone could have the option to live grandly and choose not to. In her mind, our small house and simple lifestyle were either temporary phases or evidence of poor judgment. Mom, what if this is exactly the size house we want? What if we don't want something bigger? But think about what you could do with more space. You could entertain properly, host important events, maybe even do some of your charitable work from home. The assumption that our charitable work needed to be important and proper rather than simply helpful was telling. In my mother's worldview, helping Mr. Chen fix his faucet wasn't charity because it wasn't organized, publicized, or connected to a larger cause. That night, William and I had the conversation we'd been dancing around for weeks. Do you think we're being selfish? I asked as we sat on our back deck, watching the evening light fade over our small garden. I think we're being honest, William replied, about what makes us happy, about what kind of life we want to build together, about what we think is actually important. But everyone else seems to think we're wasting something valuable. We are. We're wasting the opportunity to be impressive, to be important in other people's eyes, to have influence and status and social prominence. William took my hand. The question is whether those things are actually valuable to us. I considered this. I don't think they are. Then we're not wasting anything that matters. The final test came 2 months later, when Diana Blackwell made one last attempt to recruit us. This time, she approached us together at a coffee shop downtown, armed with new information about a specific project the foundation was launching. Sophie, William, I know you weren't interested in board positions, but I think this opportunity might appeal to you differently, she said, sliding a folder across the table. We're launching a program to provide microgrants to small businesses in underserved communities. Very direct impact, minimal administrative overhead, exactly the kind of one-on-one help that I know Sophie values. The program was genuinely appealing. It would provide small loans and business support to people starting local enterprises. Exactly the kind of practical, immediate help that I found meaningful. What would our involvement look like? William asked. Funding and advisory support. You'd work directly with grant recipients, providing both financial backing and practical guidance based on your business experience. Diana leaned forward. It's hands-on, community-focused, and completely aligned with your values. For the first time since this whole situation began, I found myself genuinely tempted. This wasn't about charity galas or board meetings or social prominence. It was about helping people build something real. Could we do this independently? I asked, without foundation oversight or publicity. Diana looked confused. Well, yes, technically you could. But why would you want to? The foundation provides structure, accountability, professional management, and visibility, William added quietly. Well, yes. Donors typically want recognition for their contributions. It helps encourage others to participate. And there it was. Even this appealing program came with the expectation that our involvement would be public, that our wealth would be used not just to help people, but to encourage other wealthy people to help people. We'll think about it, I said. But walking home from the coffee shop, I realized I'd already decided. The program was wonderful, but we could create something similar ourselves, quietly and privately, without the complications of organizational politics or public recognition. Over the next 6 months, that's exactly what we did. Working through local contacts and community organizations, we began providing small business loans and support to people in our area. A loan to help Mrs. Rodriguez expand her catering business, funding for Mr. Jackson to buy equipment for his landscaping company, support for 3 different families to start home-based businesses. We kept it simple, personal, and private. No applications, no bureaucracy, no publicity. Just direct conversations with people who had good ideas and needed some financial support to make them happen. The work was exactly what I'd hoped. We got to know the people we were helping. We could see the immediate impact of our support, and we could make decisions quickly based on personal relationships rather than institutional criteria. Most importantly, it felt authentic. We weren't helping people because we were supposed to, or because it would look good, or because it would fulfill some social obligation. We were helping because we wanted to, because we could, and because it made our community a little bit better. 6 months after the helicopter landing that changed everything, our daily life looked almost exactly the same as it had before. I still worked at Thompson's hardware store. William still traveled for his investment work. We still lived in our small house on Maple Street, still tended our garden, still took evening walks through the neighborhood. The only real difference was that we were no longer keeping our financial situation secret, but instead of using that revelation to change our lifestyle, we'd used it to confirm that the lifestyle we'd chosen was exactly right for us. My family had mostly stopped trying to convince us to live differently, though Jessica still occasionally sent me invitations to charity events. Just in case, we'd changed our minds. Marcus had found other investors for his development projects. My mother had eventually accepted that our house wasn't a temporary situation. And every few weeks, Diana Blackwell still called with new opportunities for us to make a meaningful impact, apparently unable to accept that we might already be doing exactly that. On a quiet Tuesday evening in late fall, William found me in the garden, harvesting the last tomatoes before the first frost. The helicopter was a distant memory, but the contentment was immediate and real. "Any regrets?" he asked, helping me gather the remaining vegetables. I looked around our small backyard, at our modest house, at the life we'd built together despite having the resources to build something entirely different. "None," I said. "Not a single one. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do with wealth is to remember that it doesn't have to change who you are." Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.